All right. If you're wondering where product management is heading, you wouldn't be alone. So, on today's episode, we'll be diving into how product management is changing, along with a look ahead at 2024. We're live streaming this in January 2024. So, a lot of people are thinking, what's the year ahead looking like? That's why I wanted to have this conversation here. And we're going to also weave in a little bit about how you can future proof your career in this competitive job market. So, welcome to the Modern Job Hunt. I'm your host, Ryan Federley. This is a live streamed web series and podcast, and we go into job hunting in the technology sector. Uh, I started as a first person perspective as someone impacted by a layoff, and I've been hosting guests from hiring managers to industry leaders to kind of help others in the tech sector land their next role. Um, so today we have, I'll just flash his logo up there. So today we have Gautam. Gautam is a problem solver with a sharp focus on design, data, and strategy. He's the former founder and veteran of 4 startups. He brings over a decade of experience building products from the ground up and delivering them to market. So welcome, Gautam. So if you are in the audience, you can comment on the show on LinkedIn and YouTube. We will see those comments and questions. So please do that as we get going. As usual, as a product person, I provide a few release notes at the start of the show. So if you're wondering what's changed since the last episode, I'm now on Spotify with these episodes, publishing some of the older episodes on there. So if you're an audio listener or just watching the video feed on the go, you can now do that. I've got 2 episodes up. And I've now got standardized imagery. So you may have seen Gotham's image on LinkedIn before this episode. And I'm now standardizing some of my pre-release kind of marketing material that makes it easier for me. And hopefully folks in the audience will recognize it if they like attending the live stream and be able to attend more. And then I've got a bit of a preview. So I've got 2 episodes booked into February and 2 more in the works for March. So I'm going to be shifting towards a bi-weekly schedule for anyone wanting to get this content. And yeah, with that said, we're going to dive right into it. So welcome, Gautam.
Thanks, Ryan. It's great to be here.
So yeah, this kind of came about while I've been having these coffee chats with people, and so many PMs have been impacted by layoffs, and they're all wondering like, where is this going? Where is the industry? Are we going to have product here in 5 years? Is it going to shift to program? Like, where are we going? So it's a conversation that I think is on a lot of people's minds, and I also think that similar to computers, how it used to be 101 things and now in your laptop, I'm feeling like PMing is now becoming a lot more multifaceted. So that's really why I wanted to have you on the conversation, and thanks to my network for kind of recommending you as a featured guest.
Great. Yeah, let's dive into it.
Yeah, and so in the pre-conversation we were talking a bit about Canada and the US and how the cultures are slightly different. And I think one of the things that I've always experienced, even while interviewing in the last 6 months, is that our practices are sometimes years behind those of the US. So I think one of the things is that I feel like the US is kind of the canary in the coal mine when it comes to product. Things that you see happening in the Bay Area and whatnot tend to get to Canada eventually. We just have startups that and you're someone that's moved here, so maybe you're starting to see some of the things now that you saw years ago in the States.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference that I see between Canada and the US is that Canadian culture, Canadian work culture is more consensus driven, and American work culture is more leadership driven. Americans love having a leader in the room, and that's just normal. So if you're a product manager in the United States, you're expected to be a leader. Whereas in Canada, there's a lot more management by consensus. So when you are making decisions, it's usually with a group, and you definitely come to a consensus to move forward on ideas. The idea of owning something one of the classical definitions of product management, like being a mini CEO and owning something end to end, is not really apparent in Canada as far as my experience goes. I'm sure there are lots of exceptions, young, nimble startups that have adopted American style PM culture. Like I can think of Shopify and companies with big footprints in both countries. Um, but that's what I've noticed. And the other big observation there is like in Silicon Valley for many years, over a decade, you can be a startup founder and be acquired by a FANG company. And what happens to you? You become a product manager, and no one thinks otherwise. No one thinks like, oh, you've been demoted. That's like seen as a lateral move in Silicon Valley because that's the respect given to the PM title. You're a leader, and you're still going to be a leader. You're at Facebook, so you're a PM. Like you're not going to be the CEO or in the C-suite. Whereas in Canada, I don't think that ever happens. I don't think if a startup gets acquired, the CEO becomes a PM. They become like VP of something, right? So I think that's the big difference there, and that may influence. If you're a job seeker in Canada now with remote work, you can access U.S. companies, and I would I would encourage to think like a leader if you're interviewing with a U.S. company, and if you're interviewing with a Canadian company, you kind of have to suss out the culture there. Um, what their PM culture is like. It might be still very top down from the CEO, and it's the teams are more consensus driven. So you just kind of have to read the room a little bit. Coming off as a leader might might seem a bit cocky to a Canadian company interviewing you. So just be warned there.
And do you see some of that like leadership piece as part of the compensation delta between like the Bay Area and Canada? We see a like not only like in terms of responsibilities, but like compensation is radically different between the two countries. And I know healthcare and other factors play into it in terms of that, but it seems like we have a lot of the tech sector risks without a lot of the kind of massive compensation that you see south of the border.
Yeah, and I think it's getting worse, especially with the weaker Canadian dollar. Um, I think it's part of it because that transcends job title. Like it's the same for engineering. It's the same if you're in marketing um, or accounting. So it it it's got to be like a deeper rooted phenomenon than just like responsibility for product managers. Um, and it's probably just a function of supply and demand in the United States. Every capital of a state is like effectively a mega Canadian city. You have a lot of
Mhm.
choice, and if you're willing to move, and it's really a lot more accessible to move in the United States from like Chicago to New York or to Boston, where healthcare is king, to Silicon Valley. You don't have that option in Canada. It's really three cities. They're all kind of the same in terms of landscape, so or technical landscape. So I think it's a partly supply and demand as well.
And what are some of the things that you're a product leader now? What are some of the things that coming from the states you're trying to instill in your team? What are some of these skills that you think are new to the Canadian market?
Well, my current situation is a little different because we're multinational and geographically spread out. So I wouldn't necessarily call us a Canadian company. We are technically a Canadian company, but the leadership and the culture is from all around the world. Um, Drawing from some previous experiences, however, working at a Canadian company previously, it is to um, instill that the PM, the product manager, is quarterbacking the product development team's efforts. They have a heavy influence with UX, um, QA, engineering, heavy. And a good PM should be driving um, everything forward, not being passive. And I think that is the key quality that like I value in PMs. The other key quality is just prudent risk management. I mean, I think Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, he said he's always paranoid, and I just thought that's a great attitude to have as a PM. What could go wrong, and plan for it. And no one and people tend to not ask that question. Like a UX designer, UI designer, and an engineer even may not ask that question. So I think as a PM, it's your responsibility to ask that question, and also just understand if everything is going to be ready and what could go wrong. Anticipate all those questions, and just be responsible for knowing those answers at all times to all stakeholders, to customers. The buck stops with you, the product manager, and that is the key quality. If you do not do that, you will be regarded as a project manager. So um, I think that's what you want to avoid. Nothing wrong with being a product project manager, but it's not what most people sign up for when they go into product. The key difference being strategy and responsible for the outcomes, whereas project managers is more resource management and making sure outcomes happen at when they should.
And so the risk piece is one thing that I wanted to hone in on there, because I think earlier you mentioned the responsibility and the ownership pieces as a PM. Um, I think a lot of Canadian companies don't take the same level of risk as American companies, and when you get in down to it, and you're talking with your team about outcomes and potential risks, a lot of Canadian companies will take the easy path, or the less risky path, and they'll go down that, which in my experience working with more global teams and American teams, sometimes you do go down the riskier path, and because the reward is greater. And I think that's where I think a lot of that responsibility has been stripped out. Is just our culture is less risky. So when there's less risk, people just kind of only look at one path, or they look at one or two paths, as opposed to saying, oh, there's three paths here. There's a really risky one, but the reward is the greatest.
Oh, you're exactly right. Um, that same attitude is reflected in venture capital between the two countries. Canadian VCs much more risk averse than American VCs, and that attitude permeates decision making in companies. So, like you pointed out, American companies are more likely to play to win, meaning they will try to dominate, and that may mean taking riskier bets, bigger bets, riskier bets, and you kind of know that if you fail, you're done for. Like as a startup, but that's okay. I think VCs in the U.S. want you to play to win, and if you fail, you fail. And in Canada, that's not as tolerated, even really not tolerated. Even government programs in Canada for VCs often want to see revenue. Like BDC won't even talk to you unless you have tens of thousands of dollars a month in revenue. So if you're pre-seed or at the idea phase, it's really hard to engage in the Canadian ecosystem. Not so much in the US. Everyone will listen to you. That's another thing I've noticed. So everything will listen to your idea. Everyone will listen to your idea in the US because they don't want to be the one who missed some like the next big thing. So they're very accessible VCs in the United States. Um, but you're right. Like the risk taking is not there. There may be a flip side to that coin, and people may think it's a good thing, and maybe it is. That Canadian companies generally have a harder time firing and laying off people. there's more employee protections in Canada, and the US is very much an at will state. You don't get notice. You're not even entitled to severance in California, at least. So um, they're they can be more willy nilly with losing a bet and not feeling bad about it or losing any sleep over it. In Canada, if you if you're the CEO of a company or an owner of a company, you might think twice about making a huge bet when other folks' livelihoods are at stake, and that's commendable, I think. And maybe that's just part of our cultural differences. So that's a good thing if you value stability, although, of course, many people in our industry are going through layoffs. But in the US, I think you shouldn't feel comfortable either. I mean, I think you'll be axed on a dime if they lose a bet or the product you're working on, they pull the plug and you could be out overnight. And that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, I experienced it only once where a company that I worked for did failure Fridays, and you had to share something that failed like
Hmm.
regularly on Friday. And it was really interesting because it normalized the concept of kind of like trying things, and most of these things were very small. Occasionally there would be a big failure that someone would kind of unpack as part of that like retro at the end of the week, and they were useful because it was like, okay, that's a public failure, and everyone knows it. It's like no one can make that same mistake again. And everyone knows what little things are being tested around the organization, where most of the time I've not seen that kind of culture. And that was with a team that was highly led by Americans, and they were like, we want to try a bunch of things and we want to fail and we want to publicize them immediately.
Was there enough to talk about on a weekly basis?
I mean, it wasn't like everyone talked every week, but there was a time period for that kind of sharing, and there was enough stuff that people were trying that's at least one or two things could be showcased as part of those kind of all team meetings, and so it wasn't everyone every week, but there was always something that was being brought up, which was useful. And then the founders and they were very proactive in sharing failures, even through like investor pitches and other things they were doing. So they were kind of leading by example, which was useful.
Oh, that's really great to be in a culture like that. Um, so were you encouraged to do experiments on your own to try things on the product?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was I was always being encouraged to like try small little bits in my area and then just report back on them. And often it's not really a failure when you learn something and it's like, oh well, we tried this and my users just did not react the way we anticipated. And so it's like, of course it was a week sunk into some test, but like it's like as soon as you can share that back, then the wider team learns from it. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, one of the earlier. Okay, go on.
I was going to say there's a book called The Build Trap by Melissa Perry, and she talks about there really is no failure if you're learning. It's actually part of your journey to validate ideas, and that's actually a good thing. The act of learning should be the motivation, not does it pass or fail some test. You learned something, it failed. That's a good thing to know for your next iteration or for understanding what you might want to do next. So a lot of it's a key point you raised there, though. A lot of management who are unfamiliar with product management will see that as a failure, and a good product management culture would not see it as a failure. They would see it as a win, right? Like, oh, we validated that this approach is not useful for our customers or our audience or what have you. And it's pretty amazing that you're in a culture like that. And it sounds like the founders were kind of very PM focused or have a background in PM.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, interestingly, I think they didn't, but
Hmm.
they had more of a. One of them actually had a medical background, where actually sharing failure is very important after an operating
Oh,
procedure and some of these
mhm.
things. Um, and I have been familiar with like after action reviews, being a former military reservist, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting, and like bringing it into a business context, but. Yeah, let's kind of change gears into like layoffs and the impact on new PMs. So I've been having a lot of conversations lately with folks that, you mentioned project earlier, and strategy and responsibility being some of the core differences between a project manager and a PM, and having conversations with people trying to make that switch. I think some of these things we're bringing up are core differentiators. Like you don't want to fail a project because it is really like steps 1 to 15, and how you execute is usually relatively linear. How do you feel like the layoffs are going to impact the kind of craft as a whole? Because I see it's very difficult when nobody can get in during a layoff window. Like how is that? How is this going to shape kind of our craft in a few years' time?
Um, it's hard to say what might happen in a few years' time due to this. I think one thing tends to be true is that these are cyclical patterns. Right now, we're in a buyer's market. It will once again be a seller's market, meaning you, the employee, will have more leverage about how your career shapes out, where you go, compensation, all that. Right now, it's the reverse. So that effect right now makes it harder for folks trying to break into PM. So that's the effect of the buyer's market, because the buyers can be more selective and say, well, I can get Ryan with 10 years experience or Julie at 0 years experience. Who am I going to pick, right? And I can pay Ryan less now because I can. So that's the effect now. Several years from now, it's hard to say. A few things might happen. A few young folks may be turned off from trying to break in because it's really hard, or it's harder than it used to be. And that's really unfortunate. What might happen is companies may realize that the talent pipeline, which you want to always have a healthy talent pipeline, will be like really diminished, and so they'll have to take it upon themselves to have an APM program or junior PMs with mentors in the company. That might happen because that's what happened in the early days of PMing. Google had the APM program because they're like, well, we can't find any PMs. We kind of invented it, so we're going to train them on the spot. Very famous program. Um, that may happen again. And what I mean by talent pipeline, I feel like good, mature companies will always have it because it's a competitive advantage. You want to have the right mix of senior folks and junior folks, because the junior folks you can indoctrinate in your ways. And then as natural attrition happens, people move on, switch roles, switch jobs. You have this internal talent pool already ramped up, already knows the company knowledge already, and they're there, to be promoted, to step into more responsibility. That's what I mean by talent pipeline. And every huge company, even in recessions, they're always recruiting on campus, right? They never stop that because they know this. They know this talent pipeline is pretty critical. Um, so that's all to say is, if you are a junior PM and you're finding it harder to break in, you probably have to um, reset your expectations. Maybe um, find and research companies that still value that talent pipeline, basically by looking at campus recruiting programs. If they still have it, you know that they're amenable to entry level, junior level PMs, and you do what it takes to get in front of those roles in your job search. For seasoned PMs, I think you may have to just expect longer searches and potentially lower comp than what you're used to or accustomed to. That's not a bad thing. I think anybody, whether you're employed or laid off, should always be thinking 2 moves ahead. If you get a job offer, that's fine. You just have to think about, does this help me for my next move? Maybe your goal is to be a head of product or director level or into the C-suite. If you think you can leverage that job to your next role, then that's a good thing, right? So, um, yeah, to me, I just think it might affect your strategy. But these things are, the cycles are generally shorter. So I'd be surprised if this is a multi-year phenomenon. I don't think there's
And
ever been one that long in the tech industry, and the cycles get shorter. So maybe uh, don't overthink it too much, um, because things will change.
yeah, yeah, and I mean, what I'm hearing a lot of is like junior people get the basket of skills. Doesn't You don't need to get it all as a PM. If you enter through UX or you enter through business analyst or something like that, you're getting part of the basket, and the more you can get skills that kind of fill the entire PM basket over time, the better. And I think that's something that is critical. And I think the PM role also had there's such a diverse amount of roles now. I feel like when I started as a PM, there was PM, and now there's growth PM and AI PM and data PM and all these kind of things. So I think if
Yeah,
you look at some of these ones like data PM, if you enter as a data scientist or something, that's a natural transition over. And so I think that depending on how people are making their route in, I'm always encouraging them. There's some hard skills roles that out there that you may be able to enter via depending on your background.
right. And that is a really good point. I think if I wanted to break into PM and I had no PM experience, I would take a job in QA. Like, if you cannot convince the company you work for that you should be a PM, that's already a signal that maybe you don't you don't have the leadership chops to be a PM. Like, you should be able to make that sale because they know you. They know you. Like, you're a QA and you're saying, "Hey guys, I want to be a PM one day. Help me help me get there." You're there, you have access to PMs in your company. You have access to engineers. You can learn from them, um, and you can tell your leadership where you want to be headed. And I've known people who've entered in QA, no tech background at all. Good friend of mine in Los Angeles who started in QA at Activision now is like a director of product management, in less than 10 years. Um, and he had no technical background at all. He's just a good learner, and he had a goal and he worked towards it. And it's easy to make the sale with your colleagues, like they know you, right? So if they don't hire you, who would, right? Is another way to look at it, right? So, I think that's a good bet. If you're a business analyst, even a project manager or a QA or an engineer, like if you wanted to be a PM, try succeeding in your current company to make the transition, because on the outside looking in, your title does matter. I mean, it might not matter for you, but hiring managers, HR people, it matters to them because they don't really want to think too hard about who you are. It's like, oh, Ryan's been successfully promoted. He's now a product manager for 2 years, and he used to be an engineer or a QA. They look at that and then they make their decision really quick. Like, okay, let's talk to him. That's what you want, right? Like, even if you're in QA and if you're starting out, just say like, you can negotiate your title and just say, I want to head towards product management. And if they say you're not ready, you come back and say, well, make me a junior PM. How about that? You don't have that role. Maybe I can be the first. Maybe they'll be amenable to that because it's no risk. It's very little risk to them, um, or threatening to other people. So you could start doing that. outside looking in, on paper, you're already looking like a better candidate. Like, oh, you progressed QA to PM, and they're going to keep progressing. So lower risk of a hire, you know? So that is one other strategy you could do. Enter in an adjacent role. Like you said, you soak up some of the skills, um, and then make the move internally, I think is always your best move. I think if you're get along with your colleagues, they want to help you. They want to help you succeed. And they're going to listen to you, and you can have lunch with them. They know you. And if you plant the idea in their heads, eventually, you're going to get serious consideration, much more so than outside your company, where they don't know you, and they might not take enough time to get to know you.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I always explain, you mentioned risk there, and is like the risk of a PM not succeeding is pretty big because of the amount of resources and people that a PM engages with. So like if you're working on a product and it has 5 engineers, a designer, and a few other people, let's say $1 million payroll is often the case, and that product just does not succeed, it's like that's a big risk for the company. And that's why I think it's people are always hesitant to give someone like the full gauntlet of resources. And that's why I think nudging towards it, exactly like you mentioned, junior PM, less responsibility, or bringing a lot of that QA background, is because you're going in and you have a lot of the tools, and then you're only finishing your tool set once you get into the role, because it is quite a difference in terms of responsibility from a QA to a PM.
Oh, it is for sure. And I think, it shouldn't be a situation where you're sitting on a P&L by yourself as a PM. I think the stakes are high, like you said, the risk is high, but the company should be helping you minimize execution risk and market risk. How? Well, giving you enough market research, giving you the resources to do the market research, giving you the resources to talk to customers, even teams who do this for you. And execution risk, you can reduce it by protecting your engineers from context switching, hiring specialists who might be able to execute on a new technology or skill better than the current team. If they're not doing that, they're not giving you the best chance of success, and they should be. So it's not like you're there, or you shouldn't be there by yourself feeling like you have to make it work. Then the second thing is, as a PM, you have to fight to set expectations. Like the return on investment for any product management work can be a long window of time. So you can't like ship something and the next day it makes a huge impact. Maybe if you're working at Lululemon and you made a small update to a checkout flow, you will see the results, but that's like a high volume, like 1% difference will make an impact. But if you're working at a something that makes $1 million or a couple $1 million, it's not going to change overnight. There's a lot of inertia to changes in the product having an effect on the business or even the product itself. People have to learn about it. People have to discover about it. People have to use it. People have to express satisfaction with it, that it could lead to more sales, or that it does lead to more sales. Sales cycle could be months. If you're B2B, it could be 6 months. So you wouldn't see it. So as a PM, you have to make sure that people are not selling you short or your team short because of like weird expectations. I mean, if you work at Apple or Google, it's a bit different because a few million people might see something you do in the matter of a day, right? There will be some information on that. Every other startup, especially B2B, you won't hear anything about it for months because it's not in the sales cycle yet.
So I thought I on the future proofing kind of topic, I thought I'd jump into kind of like the PM role changes versus external perception changes. I feel like in 2023, we went through this thing where some companies were eliminating the entire PM function. Some companies were merging it with product marketing and calling it product marketing, and I felt like the jobs often when they remained didn't change very much, but there hasn't this external kind of noise around the PM function more so than like front end engineering, back end engineering, data science. It's like it seems like at least maybe it might be my echo chamber, but it seems like the PM role has been a bit of a lightning rod in the tech sector. Do you see either the role itself changing or external perception in the next 12 to 24 months, like as kind of things progress?
That's a really good question. Um, in my experience, it really depends on the culture of the organization you're in. It, PMing in a company can be wildly different depending on the culture. If it's, say, engineering led versus marketing led, brand and marketing led, like your experience as a PM at Lululemon will be completely different than at a startup in Silicon Valley founded by engineers. Completely different expectations and demands of that role. Whereas, like if you're in a big company, communication will be valued higher than technical acumen, which would be valued at a startup or a smaller company. Um, I think some companies that are reflective about their processes, like Airbnb, have realized that the best PMs they have are doing product marketing work, and that's probably what informed their decision. Um, so they want to buy us for doing more of that. So they made that explicit change that those are the kind of soft skills or skills they want to see in their PMs. And maybe they also realized, observing their teams, that um, technical uh, technical PM, if they have that role, or engineering manager, have actually a lot of say in product development and design and risk management. And then the actual getting it over the hump and launching it and getting it to traction, making sure users understand, is kind of PMing it. Um, and that is something they want to shift their PMs towards. But that, I think, really depends on their culture and what they hire for. So I think that's what colors the um, the changes in roles is the culture. So I'm not too concerned about it, because if PM's been around for 20 years, pretty much the variability in what a PM does has been around for 20 years. So that's nothing new. So I don't really see this as different. It's just maybe exploiting that we're all generalists. Like, hey, why don't you just do more PMMing, because you know the product really well. Keep doing, like, do more of that. And we're not going to hire explicit PMMs who don't work on development at all. Um, that's, I guess that's just pretty natural shift for some companies. But yeah, I don't see the fact that you wear many hats is a new thing. That's always been there.
And when you're building your team, do you try to complement people's skill sets? Like if you have a strong technical PM, do you try to bring in a more of a PMM type communication centric and marketing centric person? Or for the most part, because you're in a certain niche, you need a lot of parallel similar skills?
Yeah, again, I think that depends on the culture in the industry. I think in general, you want to have, the more diverse your product managers are, like complementary in skills and experience, the better. Um, and then to the extent you need to specialize will vary on domain. Like if you're in the medical industry, um, the domain knowledge is going to be like extremely important, and that can be seen as a degree of like technical, acumen. And likewise, like, I'm working in building Internet of Things now, commercial real estate and climate tech. It's a body of knowledge that isn't super accessible. So, like, it does help to know it, but then we also realize that if you're um, adaptable and a good learner, then that's extremely valuable to have too. So I'd say it depends on the culture, but I would always err for diversity. Like I would rather have people from completely different backgrounds on the team than from the same industry.
I think that's one of the things that I always find like a bit challenging when I'm changing careers as a PM, because you look at 10 different job descriptions and they've got some are growth heavy, some are technical heavy, and really you have to weed out almost like 9 or 8 of them because you just don't fit them, although it's the same PM overall, job function. There is such a diversity of requirements in one role, and then you don't know if that team needs a communication centric person or a technical centric person. So it is like a bit more challenging as opposed to, if you're a front end engineer or something and you do a coding test and you're good, then you kind of really know where you stand.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say some companies on their job descriptions will still encourage people to apply who don't have certain skills or domain knowledge. And even further, some companies say, even if we don't have a job posting, send us your resume anyway, um, because maybe you're amazing and we want to meet you. I think those companies realize that, if you're an excellent PM, or anyone really, engineer, anybody, um, it's still in their interest to talk to you, even hire you if you're willing to learn their domain. Um, but not all companies, obviously, as you mentioned, like, people can be stubborn. So I'd say it even there it depends on culture. I've seen cultures where really value, they don't care about you being, you know, in an industry for 5 years. They actually care about, how good of a generalist you are if you've succeeded in the past, no matter what has been thrown at you. And they're like, yeah, let's get this person. They're going to be great. And we'll teach them what they need to know. That, that's the kind of culture that I would gravitate towards, for sure.
So as we kind of start to kind of wrap up here, I'm curious what you see in the next 12 to 24 months in terms of the tech sector. Do you see us kind of coming out of this into that buyer's market that you mentioned earlier, in terms of like more jobs available, or do you see 2024 being a bit of a slow year where we're all kind of reeling from more layoffs and stabilizing?
I think it's going to be a bit bumpy until the next US election, um, because some companies may be considering that as an input to their long term hiring plans and bet taking. Certainly, I would, if I knew that democracy is at risk. I might be more conservative than I would otherwise, right? So um, that certainly will color decisions. So that is not a good thing if you're a job seeker. If employers are more risk averse, and they probably should be right now, um, and you have to pay attention to which way the wind is blowing and act accordingly. In terms of how things may evolve in PMing, I think we're still in the second inning, maybe first inning, of Gen AI impacting how we do our jobs. It's still very rough. There's a lot of startups using it as PM aid or tools, and they're not very good. Like, at this stage, doesn't mean they won't be good in the future. That's just where we are. But if I was a PM, I would be paying attention to the availability of these tools and this technology to just be a better PM. And I think they will evolve to support uh, PMs or any vertical very, very, very well. Right now, they're highly general in their application, and they're not. That means they're not actually very good at any one thing. Maybe a few things, but not certainly not in my experience for like PMing. Like writing a product requirement doc has been terrible for ChatGPT, but it is good in some ways, like getting you started on one. I think that'll evolve to, you know, creating wireframes for you, doing risk analysis, scoping things, um, and breaking them down into like less riskier paths as it matures. But I think that will take years to happen. Um, but as a PM, and as you know, any generalist, you should always be learning. So don't ever stop learning. You can't. This is an accounting where maybe tax law changes every few years, and that's all you need to know. Um, PMing will evolve all consistently every year, all the time, and you owe it to yourself in your career to be on top of that. It is can be annoying to like always having to be learning and to study and to see what's out there on top of doing your job. Um, but I think that's the way you have like that's prudent risk management on your own part. Like, how do you manage risk in your own career? And I think one thing is just to be on top of those things because you never know um, when something hits and has traction. You already have an advantage. You're ready to start utilizing something in your next role, and there may be even uh, in a market like this, there will be like small pockets of demand where you can slide right in, right? Because you've utilized something or you're aware of something, and maybe you've done a project with it, and you're just going to be a better candidate than the rest. Um, so that's how I think things will change. And unfortunately, it might mean like less PMs because a PM can do more with these tools. But again, that's like a multi-year effect. So I don't think this will be like a 2024 thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think as consumer expectations change, we'll all have to kind of lift our game. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how some of the tools around competitive intelligence and customer review kind of synthesis provide us like more relevant information to make product decisions going forward.
Definitely.
Great. So, yeah, as we wrap up, so I'd like to have closing tips and resources as one of my last questions, which is basically like, you provided some tips there around AI, Gen AI, but also just any books that you have read in the last 12 months, any podcasts or anything that you think, if you're getting into PM, if you want to future-proof yourself, this is what you should look at.
Well, the book I mentioned, The Build Trap by Melissa Perry, is, I think, a must read for anybody, especially non PMs. I think that's a great. It talks about strategy. It talks about learning as one of the key activities of a PM, and I think that's vital. And it'll protect you from becoming a project manager or being um, underutilized. And then the other couple of resources that I use habitually are I read Hacker News every day. I use a service that um, emails me the top 10 uh, articles on Hacker News, so I don't have to remember to go there. I can just see it in my inbox and see what are the top headlines. And that's been amazing. Like, I really don't miss out on anything that's in the zeitgeist in the tech universe. And then lastly, I do subscribe to Lenny Richitsky's newsletter, which is paid, and then I became a member of his Slack community, which is open to the subscribers, and there's a wealth of knowledge and resources on many topics there, from Gen AI to product management, engineering, marketing. There's lots of resources for job seekers, and there's a lot of job postings there. So Um, and it's a very nice community. They're very accessible and supporting. So those are my main resources that I use to stay on top of things.
Great. Well, yeah, thanks for those. Oh, I've been listening to Lenny's podcast for a couple of years now, and I haven't made the jump into his paid community, but that's good to know that it's a wealth of resources. Yeah, so for anyone interested in getting more episodes like this, please subscribe on Spotify or YouTube. That link above will kind of take you to my link tree, which will show you more content. And thanks, Gautam, for attending today. So an Easter egg on the next episode that I mentioned early in the show, it's going to be February 7th at 10:45 a.m. Pacific. We'll be talking to Rich Mironoff about how to position yourself to make the jump from individual contributor to director. So anyone interested in kind of making that jump up to director or group PM or principal PM, that's what we're going to go into on February 7th with Rich. And thanks again, Gautam, for kind of an amazing talk today. And I do comment back to people on LinkedIn and YouTube. So if anyone is interested, just put the comments in there, and I'll try to get back to you later. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Signing
Ryan.
out.